So let's give some historical context to this because we've been talking about this. And so let me give you some examples, okay? And this is stuff that you can look up. Plenty of books out there about this and stuff online that you can look up. There was a place, the Weimar Republic, we're talking about Germany here, called the Weimar Republic at the time. This was in the 1920s. Now, this is also technically considered also a period, the Weimar Republic. So anywhere between 1918 to about 1933, right around there, is the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic was the government that came in Germany, okay, after World War I. And it's the one that preceded the Nazi regime, okay? So it wasn't there for many years, okay, 15 years or so. But it has an interesting kind of hold on the minds of people. People that study it and look at it see this as a very progressive time, as a time where social experiments were being tried and people really wanted to do something different. A part of the problem there was that, the idea of the 1,000-year reign was on the minds of many people. And of course, with World War I, that hadn't come to fruition. So you had some people that were simply, just not feeling good about themselves. And in some ways, the society started looking for ways to fix that. What can we do? What kind of government can we form? What kind of society should we have? And they started pushing the envelope on different things, okay? And it really started going against traditional thought and just pushing the envelope. There's nothing wrong with pushing the envelope in some sense, okay? We wanna have advances, right? We wanna have better healthcare. We wanna have better medicine, better computers, technology, science. All of those things are important, certainly. None of that we don't want to do away with any of that. But there are certain things in society that have become over time traditional for a reason. And so when you start pushing against that, then you have some serious consequences. And disarming people, for example, is one of those. And it's unfortunately something that's happening in our country. There is a push to try to, get people to have no weapons, okay, or have the minimal amount of weapons. And there's a problem. So let's look at this. In 1920, the Weimar Republic made gun registration mandatory, okay? So gun registration, if you don't know exactly what that is, just think about you buy a gun and you have to provide a government ID, your name, your contact information, where you live, all that stuff. And they know that, this gun with this serial number belongs to this citizen of the state, okay? And there's two things that we can look at this. And is that the compliant citizens, okay, those that complied with the gun registration mandate, we can call them the docile people. And sure enough, they registered and they had their gun. Not a big deal, right? But then you had the non-compliant people, the people who were like, I ain't registering my gun. And in the Weimar Republic, those people were, generally speaking here, communists and Nazis, okay? Which is interesting because they were actually the more violent people when it came to politics, at least, okay? Now, what was the reason? What was the reason given by the government of the Weimar Republic for the gun registration mandate? Well, it was simple. It was public safety. Now, during this time, there was also confiscation of weapons, okay? Certain weapons that you couldn't have. And so there was confiscation of weapons. And then there was also the gun registration. So you had these two things going on. Well, what's the consequence here? Well, the consequence is not as when you say it out loud, it doesn't sound that bad. But here's the consequence. The consequence is that the state now has a record of gun owners. And you might think to yourself, well, that's not so bad, you know? And I want to register my weapon. We should be able to do that. That doesn't sound so bad. Okay. Well, maybe it doesn't sound so bad. But what happens next? Well, in 1933, the Nazis take over. Okay. And the first thing they do is they use the gun registration records to identify their threats and to go against their political opponents. And what was the common denominator? Well, they're looking at, okay, we know this person is a threat and we know this person is against us politically. Let's look at the gun registration records. And they were like, oh, yep, they own guns. Now they have this really valuable information. And what happens once these people get identified? Well, they get disarmed. And another thing happens, and this did happen during the Nazi regime, was that constitutional rights were suspended. And when they had the record of where these gun owners lived, well, now there was widespread illegal search and seizure going on. They're coming into your home, they're taking your weapons, and maybe even throwing you in jail in the process, okay? Gun clubs, okay, these were independently owned gun clubs. They were banned, okay, and the owners of those clubs were imprisoned. This started happening in Nazi Germany. And then, of course, you know, you had the undesirables. And this is one of the things that happens. Anyone that the Nazis deemed undesirable, they decided they were just going to throw in prison. Well, why is that interesting? Well, we have language like that nowadays, right? And we hear it a lot from the left. And they speak of, for example, Trump supporters as deplorable people. Okay, remember Hillary Clinton saying that. And the idea behind this is that it paints a certain group of people with the widest brush possible in order to then be able to go and do something bad, usually not good, against them, okay? And so you can imagine something like this. You know, you're a gun owner, and because you're a gun owner, well, there's a good chance that the people that live with you might be okay with you owning a gun. And so now they're also going to be thrown in a camp. You know, it's really a jail because you might also be a threat. And then anybody else who might have gone shooting with you or may have, you know, maybe bought a gun from you or was just a friend of yours, they knew that you owned a gun. Well, they might be a threat too. And so you can see how we can quickly then lump in a whole entire group of people into a category of undesirables or deplorable or something like that, and then target them, okay, as if they were evil doers in the societies, okay. And the last thing that we know happened here, obviously, was that Jews were targeted. Now, Jews were targeted specifically because the authorities that distributed firearms were told you cannot give a gun permit to any Jewish person. Now, this was interesting because by the time that 1938 came along, a few years later, the Gun Control Act was passed by Hitler. And one of the things that it did was it disarmed the Jews. And they used the records that the Weimar Republic had gotten with the gun registration to know where to go to get the guns from the Jews. So here you have a very innocent public safety policy, right, now being used by a tyrannical government, the Nazis in this case, to go target Jews. Well, why Jews? Just because they're Jews. just because we want to. Well, there was the confiscation of their weapons. These same Jews, a lot of them, what happened was because here's a tactic that the government will use. They asked them, hey, would you surrender your arms? Would you volunteer your gun into the government? And people that would come with their guns and volunteer their weapons, say, okay, I don't want to get in trouble. Here's my gun. They would then take those Jews and turn them over to the Gestapo. They would get arrested. And so it's a lose-lose situation, because if you volunteer it, you're going to go to the Gestapo. And if you don't, they're going to, illegally search and seize your property and still probably throw you in jail, if not kill you in the process. And so this is a devastating thing that's happening. And this is not a story. This is historical fact. Okay? Well, today, we're not telling people, hey, surrender your arms, but we'll do a community gun buyback program. Oh, yeah, you didn't know these exist. They exist here in Dallas, where I live. I looked it up. They exist where I used to live in Chicago. And gun buyback programs, they're real simple. If you have a gun that you just don't want anymore, or maybe it doesn't work, or maybe you just found it, we're not going to ask any question. You just come by and we're going to give you a $100 Visa gift card. Oh, wow, $100. Well, once you spend your $100, guess what? You're still disarmed. You're defenseless. Now, there's one particular people that never participate in these gun buyback programs. They're called criminals. Okay? For sure. And intelligent people that know their Second Amendment. Okay? And I don't mean intelligent in the sense of they got a higher IQ or something like that. I just mean people that know what the Second Amendment is and actually know the dangers of disarming citizens. Okay? Okay, so what happens after, the Jews are disarmed? Well, they are attacked. That's right. They get attacked. On November 9th, okay, the 9th of November, 9th and 10th, okay, so that night, in 1938, is called the Night of Broken Glass. This was a night where businesses and homes of Jews were broken into and burned down. I think it was hundreds of churches, of synagogues were burned to the ground. Police didn't do nothing. They just kind of stepped back and let the rioters do what they were going to do. And they were specifically targeting Jewish people and their businesses and their homes. And the firemen were given orders by the government to not put out the fires at the synagogues. Let them burn. Okay? Which is extraordinary. I mean, not too long ago, not literally right down the block from where I live, old, and it was a pretty large church, burned to the ground. It was a 4-alarm fire, and I think those firefighters were there for at least 18, 20 hours fighting this fire. Just giving it all they can, doing whatever they can. They didn't just stand by. And so there's a message that is sent in there. And why was it called the Night of Broken Glass? Well, it was called the Night of Broken Glass because the streets were littered with broken glass all over. Kind of reminds you of the riots, the pandemic riots, right? The George Floyd riots that happened, where the streets were littered in broken glass. They were, businesses were set on fire. We can't say that some particular people were targeted. I think this was kind of a free-for-all. But it's a form of this kind of craziness that happens. The problem as well was that over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested that night. Okay? They were arrested because they were Jewish, by the way, for no other reason. And so this was a devastating night. And here's the problem. It was all planned. The reason that they disarmed the people was because they were planning this night. They were planning this attack. And so in order for it to be easier, they had to disarm the people of their weapons. And so if by now you're not seeing the dangers of disarming the citizens, then I don't know if I can help you. I only got a few more pages here, so maybe I can help you. But if by now you're not seeing it, I don't know if I can help you. So there's an order to this chaos, isn't there? Well, the first thing you do is you disarm. The second thing you do is you create a spark. We'll talk about that here in a second. And the third thing that you do is attack. Now, the spark for the night in 1938, November 9th and 10th, was that a young Jewish man in a fit of rage, apparently, killed a German diplomat. And this was used to say, look, this is how all Jewish people are. And boy, when the whole George Floyd thing happened, all cops are like this and all white people are like this. And you just started hearing these broad statements. Okay. The pandemic was the same way. Oh, these anti-vaxxers or anti-mask people, they're going to kill us. Right. And you hear this like over things. So they use this thing to spark this chaos. And usually what follows is riots. Okay. So this was planned.